Hi, welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this tutorial episode, I'm going to show you how to create the water lily artwork that I did. This artwork is a great example of the power of contrast. The flower petals have a lot of tan color on them, but they still look white because of the dark background. Well, let's get burning. Begin by using a writer pen tip to burn along the edges of the letters. Do not fill in the letters, instead just burn along their outer edges to define them. Now I want to mention that I am using Colwood's Micro Writer pen tip. This pen tip is their old style, and it's the equivalent of the new style if you go buy one on their website. Now, as you can see, I keep my reference lettering nearby to consult with as I work. Take your time and work slowly and carefully. Use a pencil eraser and rub over the letters to remove the graphite. Afterwards, switch back to a writer pen tip and burn in the letters to a very dark brown or black color. I have the heat set up a bit high on my burner as I want the pen tip to create gouges in the wood as it burns. Once you are done burning in the letters, use the tip of a small pointed knife to scrape away the charring on the letters. This is a way of embossing the letters. It takes a bit of time to do. Now keep in mind that I am showing you how I did things. I'm not saying that this is the best or only way to do things. With the lettering done, use a writer pen tip to burn around the edges of the lily pads and each petal on the lily. Do not burn in the shadow lines on the lily petals. Use the shader of your choice and burn circular motion along the edge of the lily pad by the lettering. This is to soften or blur the edge of the lily pad. Afterwards, burn the background to a dark brown or black color. Make sure to use the flat of the shader when burning over the lettering. This will ensure it glides over the grooved letters and won't sink down in and darken them up. Use the burn stroke of your preference for the background. There isn't a wrong or right burn stroke to use. Right now, I'm just burning a wide band of dark color around the flower. I'm creating a buffer zone. Once the buffer zone is done, the rest of the background can be burned in much quicker because you don't have to get very close to the flower. Use the flat of the shader and burn over the edges of the lily pads. Then, very lightly burn in the shadow markings on the flower petals. Just burn along the edges of the shadow marks and keep them as light in color as possible. Our goal is to erase the pencil marks as they might interfere with the shading on the white petals. When we burn in the flower, we will adjust the shadows as needed. So keep your burn strokes very pale right now. As you work, keep your reference photo nearby and consult with it before starting a new petal. I do this to familiarize myself with the shadows, and this helps me burn them in more accurately. Lift your pen tip up and away from the wood when you pause to examine the reference photo. I removed all of my pauses from this video just to save time. Also, make sure that the heat on your burner is set so that you are getting a light to medium tan burn result. We are working on a white flower, so the burn strokes shouldn't be very dark. As I burn in the shadow edges, I am using circular motion and uniform strokes. They are two of my favorite burn strokes to use, but feel free to use the burn stroke of your preference. Now rub a pencil eraser over the board and remove any residual graphite. Afterwards, finish up the background. Burn the area under the left side of the flower to a dark brown or black color. Let the color fade a few shades near the left edge of the lily pad down here. Then burn the remaining area to a solid or uniform dark brown or black color. Next, use circular motion to burn in the small gap between the two lily pads. I'm using circular motion to ensure that the edges of the lily pad are soft. I plan to make the lily pads slightly out of focus to help keep the emphasis on the white lily. Burn along the remaining edges of the large lily pad. Keep the color much lighter than the background and make sure to keep the edges soft. Resume burning the background to a dark brown or black color. Use the burn stroke and the shader pen tip of your preference for this. Rotate the board, if needed, as you work. When burning along the edges of the lily pads, make sure you don't create hard or clearly defined edges. I burn a row or band of circular motion along the edge of the little lily pad. Then I burn another row or band of circular motion next to the edge. The second row of circular motion is burned much darker. This creates a buffer zone. After that is done, resume burning the background with the burn stroke of your preference. Now let's work on the lily pads. Use circular motion and burn in the large lily pad. Make the right side darker than the left. The reason is that the right side will provide nice contrast with the white flower. Now I chose circular motion because I wanted subtle variations in the burn to give the lily pad a hint of texture. I do not have video of the small lily pad being burned in, but burn it in using circular motion and make the left side darker than the right. I put an image of my final artwork in the upper left corner of the screen. This way you can see how I burned in the small lily pad. Also, I created a small pad shape in the lower right corner, as that is where I like to sign my artwork. Rotate the board as needed to be able to keep the pen tip in optimal position when working around the flower petals. As you can see, I'm reburning over areas to darken them up. I burn a dark line along the edge of any flower petal and then fill in the pad with circular motion. I am deliberately making sure that my burn results are not uniform in color. As I mentioned before, I wanted to give a hint of texture to the lily pads. Keep in mind, as you work on this, you can change how it looks. You can make the background less dark. Maybe you would prefer to replicate the photo and fill the background with more lily pads and hint of distant flowers. It is your artwork, so let your creativity through. We will start on the lower center petal on the flower. This petal is mostly in shadows, but does have a triangular patch of sunlight striking it. I marked the spot with a green circle. The petal is fairly uniform in color, and it has some dark lines running through it. Keep your pen tip in optimal position when working along the edges next to the nearby flower petals. I am using a combination of circular motion and uniform strokes to burn in the petal. On this particular petal, uniform strokes would work perfect since the area is mainly uniform in color. But for some reason, I just like using circular motion. Now I want to point out that there is a dark spot on the petal where I burned over a grain line. I eventually fixed this by scraping away at it. When that dark spot eventually disappears from the video, that's what happened. As you are working, you may need to darken up the lines running through the petal. If so, just use the razor edge of the shader to reburn over them. Continue to burn and reburn over the flower petal until the shadows are a dark tan color. I did move video clips around to show this petal in its entirety, so don't be surprised when an adjacent petal is appearing done. We'll get to it. Now, as I said, continue to burn and reburn till you get to the darkness level that is needed. For the majority of the reburning, I used uniform strokes, but occasionally there was some circular motion. Let's start on the adjacent petal to the right. It has a green underside and a fairly dark shadow at the end of it. Begin by burning in the dark shadowed tip and then burn in the green area. Reburn as needed to darken them up. Make sure that the color or darkness level remains considerably lighter than the background. Aim for a dark tan on the green area and a very light brown or extra dark tan on the shadowed tip. Burn the white area of the petal to a much lighter tan color. Make the color lighter at the top of the petal and let it get gradually darker by a shade or two at the bottom. The lowest petal on the right is mostly in shadows, and its sides are curling upward. The underside of the petal is green with white edges. Also, there is a very distinctive shadow line along the top surface of the petal. I like to work on the darker areas first, so begin by burning in the green underside of the petal. Since it is green and in shadows, make it the same or very similar in color to the dark end that we did on the previous petal. I am using a combination of uniform strokes and circular motion to burn in the petal. These are the same burn strokes I have used on the previous petals. Hopefully, you notice that I burned over the white edge. This petal is in shadows, so the edge should be a tan color. After getting a base layer of color burned onto the petal, reburn over it to darken it up. Do not burn all the way to the top edge of the petal. Instead, stop a little ways next to the edge. This will create that white border the petal has. Make sure that your petal is a number of shades lighter than the background. You want good contrast between the petal and the background. Now burn a tan line under the curved edge on the upper side of the petal. Next, rotate the board so your pen tip is in optimal position and burn a dark tan line under the other curled edge on the petal. Then burn in the distinctive shadow on the petal top. I want to remind you that any time you rotate the board, you should also rotate your reference material to match. This will make it much easier to compare your art with the reference material and determine what needs to be done. When working near the edge of the adjacent petal, make sure to keep your pen tip in optimal position by either rotating the board or angling your hand around. You want to have crisp, clean, clearly defined edges on the flower petals. Use the razor edge of the shader to burn in the lines on the petal top. Then finish burning in the distinctive shadow. Also, burn along the green portion on the upper curled petal to darken it. Lastly, do any fine-tuning on the petal that is needed. Now we'll work on the two lower left petals. The lower petal is in shadows, pale in color, and broken off. The other petal is curled, has a green underside, and a cast shadow along the top. Begin by burning in the lower petal to a tan color. Then start on the other petal. Notice how the petal is darker along the bottom and gets lighter towards the top. Rotate the board as needed when working along the edges of the petals. I deviated from the photo and made the far portion of the lower petal much darker than it really is, and I did this for contrast. Like before, I am using uniform strokes and circular motion to burn in the petals. The last thing I want to point out is the pale edge on the curled petal. When you work in the area, leave the edge a few shades lighter in color. With the adjacent lower petal to the right, we see that it is curled, has a slightly green tip, and a distinctive cast shadow on the right. Begin with the distinctive shadow, and then work on the shadowed underside of the petal. Because I have my burner set to a fairly low heat, it takes a lot of reburning to build up the color. You can call this the low and slow approach. It's a combination of low heat and slowly building up the color to get a lot of tonal variation, which produces a more visually interesting looking artwork. If needed, rotate the board and burn a dark tan line along the lower edge of the petal, then extend the color a bit. Afterwards, do any fine-tuning that is needed on the flower petal. Our next petal is curved with a shadow that runs along the length of the curled edge. A similar shadow is on the opposite curled edge, plus there is a distinctive cast shadow on the petal. Lightly burn along the petal surface where it is curling upward. Then start on the distinctive cast shadow. Rotate the board if needed to keep your pen tip in optimal position when working along the edge of the lower curled petal. A reminder that you should be consulting with your reference photo often while working on the flower. I removed the many pauses from the video where I stopped to look at the reference photo that I keep very close by. When looking at the reference photo, you are checking shadow placement, darkness levels, and overall contrast. Then look at your artwork and make sure that it is similar. Our next petal has a shadowed end, a shadowed underside, and a cast shadow along the right side of it. Lastly, there is a bit of reflected light along the upper back of the petal. Begin with the shadows. Burn the shadowed end to a dark tan color and the other shadows a shade or two lighter than that. Make sure to avoid the reflected light area. You may have noticed that the board I'm burning on has a lot of grain lines on it. I'm trying to avoid burning over them as much as possible. You'll see there are times when I burn up to a grain line and then skip over it and resume burning. But I will admit it's not always easy to do this. Let's do the next two petals on the left. The further petal is uniform in color and slightly out of focus, which I'm ignoring. The other petal is curled upward on the edges, and both sides have shadows. It's just that the lower or left edge is shadowed on the outside of the petal, and the upper or right edge is shadowed on the inside or surface of the petal. The next petal has a shadowed underside and a slight indentation near the upper end of it. Also, the petal shadow gets lighter near the base where sunlight is striking. So burn in the shadow to a tan color and make sure to let the color get a shade or two lighter as you near the base of the petal. Rotate the board as needed while you work on the flower, and don't forget that slight indentation near the top. This petal has a dark shadow along the top left that fades near the base. Also, there is a hard edge along part of the shadow. The color is lighter to the left of that hard edge. Lastly, there are two bands of shadows that curve along the right side of the petal. Start on the shadows. Consult with the reference photo often to determine how dark to burn them in. How I do this is I look at the reference photo and compare the darkness to shadows on previous petals. When I find a match, I burn in the shadow to the same darkness level that I did on that matched petal. This petal has a dark shadow running vertically down its length. The lower left area is lit up so paler in color than the rest of the petal. On the right, there are two shadowed bands that curve over the petal. There is a third curving shadowed band that is below the first two, and it is lighter in color. As I said before, I prefer to work on the darker areas first. So with the white lily flower, that means I start with the shadows. Before burning any petal, you should always consult with the reference photo to familiarize yourself with the shadow placement and their darkness levels. Let's work on the three petals behind the flower center. The left one has a shadow along the right edge, and there is a fainter or paler shadow in the center. The petal in the back has a curled right edge that is lit up on the edge. A shadow is next to the curled edge, and the shadow gets lighter near the center of the petal. The right petal also has a shadow along its right edge. This petal also has a yellow hue from the light reflecting off the yellow stamen, or whatever they're called. We will ignore the yellow hue and instead treat the petal as though it's receiving direct sunlight. This petal is mostly shadowed. There are a few small patches of direct light at the top of it. Also, there is a unique area of reflected light near the bottom or the base of the petal. I am still using circular motion and uniform strokes to burn in the flower. Once I started working on the flower, I set my burner to a low heat that produced a medium tan burn color. I haven't adjusted the heat setting after that. Instead, I use hand speed and reburning to create the shadows. These three petals are all similar in that they have curled right edges that are receiving some sunlight. They have a dark shadow that starts next to the curved edge. And the shadow gets a touch lighter along the left edge. With the first two petals, burn in the shadow and let the color fade a bit on the left side. With the petal in the back, burn in the shadow, but let it get lighter near the halfway mark. After you burn in the shadow on each petal, then lightly burn over the curled edge on the petal. The next two petals are taco shell shaped. By that I mean they have very curled up edges. The closer or right curled edge is much lighter in color than the left edge. There are shadows on the inside or petal surface. The shadow is darkest next to the right curled edge. With the inner petal, make sure to leave the left edge pale enough to contrast with the petal behind it. The curled right edge of each petal is darker along the back or the right side of it. The color gets much lighter along the front or left side where the petal edge ends and the shadowed surface begins. This curled petal has a darker shadow running along the length of the lower right curled edge. The back side of that curled edge is illuminated or sunlit. The opposite edge has a shadow under it. That shadow gets much lighter in color not far from the edge. Let's recap the information as I finish burning in the flower. Keep your burner set so you are getting a medium tan burn color. Then use reburning and hand speed to build up the shadows on each petal. Before starting on a petal, carefully examine the reference photo. Look at where the darkest and lightest areas are on the petal. Look at the shape of the shadows. Some shadows are contouring shadows that give the petal shape. Others are cast shadows from nearby flower petals. As you burn in the shadows, be mindful of their darkness level. Make sure that your color levels are similar. By that I mean, if you are burning your darkest shadow color to a dark tan, then make sure to use that same color level on any other petals with a matching shadow color. It would look very off to have a petal with dark brown shadows if everything else is in the tan ranges. I used circular motion and uniform strokes to burn in the flower. I only mention this because I get frequent questions about how I'm moving my hand. With that said, please keep in mind that you are free to use the burn stroke of your preference. I am showing you how I do things, but that is not the only way to do it. Lastly, rotate the board as needed to keep your pen tip in optimal position, as each petal should have clearly defined edges. The very last step is to burn in the stamen. Use a writer pen tip and burn them into a medium brown color. I do realize that the stamen are yellow in the reference photo, but we can't burn a yellow color. To make things easy, I chose to make the stamen dark. Plus, the dark color helps them stand out nicely from the white flower petals. We are all done. I hope the information is helpful and that you'll try the project yourself. On my website, Pyrography Made Easy, I have the written version of this tutorial along with the reference photo and a free pattern. So feel free to check that out anytime. Well, thank you for watching my video, and I will see you next week.